All right, back. Now, in the second part, we get to the interesting part, and that is the splitting of the electric wave, the current component and the voltage component by half a cycle. Now, when that happens, the current reverses direction, and instead of consumption of energy, now you're producing it. And it effectively produces a standing wave, even though the whole wave itself is not standing still. It is equivalent to a self-standing wave in the sense that it's not going anywhere because the voltage is oriented one way and you got your current going in the opposite way. So it effectively, as far as I'm concerned, is a standing wave unless corrected unless I know otherwise. So it doesn't really go anywhere to become a standing wave. Normally, the other way to create a standing wave is you send a wave out, and then it cross-interferes with its echo coming back in such a way that they cancel each other and create a standing wave. But in this case, we don't even send it out. We've got a wave, and it reverses direction of its current with respect to its voltage, and thus becomes a standing wave without even having had gone anywhere. Now, what that means is, instead of the currency, the cryptocurrency being spent, now we get it instead of losing it. So when we want to buy a product, we're paid to buy the product. And that's kind of like getting a line of credit that you never have to pay back. In fact, that is what it is. It's a line of credit that you never have to pay back. But again, I still consider it reactive power, even though it's negative power factor, because it's the daughter of her two parents, which are reactive and zero power factor, and the parents are useless, but the daughter, we can say she's a generator, but she's a fiction. She's a mathematical fiction. She's the result of the two parents. So we still haven't converted her into positive power factor that's real, that's actual, and we can spend. So in a sense, she's still a fiction. She's still reactive power, even though she's not zero power factor. She's negative power factor, but she's still reactive in the sense that she's not real. And this is something not covered by all the, lectures on reactive power. They concern themselves. Well, they don't concern themselves with negative power factor. They concern themselves merely with zero power factor and positive power factor, and that's it, as if negative does not exist. And some of them claim negative power factor does not exist. Well, it's true, it doesn't, except as a mathematical fiction, but we have to go there, just like imaginary numbers. We have to go there even though we don't want to. No, anything but that, because then we'll get free energy. That's the whole point of this. So having current reverse itself is like credit, getting a line of credit that you never have to pay back. You simply get it, and it keeps building along with the voltage. So now, see, we gave it a certain amount of a fraction of a species to begin with that actually cost us something. But we've converted it into credit, a line of credit that keeps accumulating and building at an exponential rate, because the more we have, the more quickly it builds, all along with the frequency. The frequency will also determine the growth rate, but also the accumulation. The amplitude of accumulation will also contribute to the growth rate, the two together. And since the accumulation is growing at a multiplicative value, it becomes an exponential, or if you prefer, a logarithmic growth rate. And so, but this is a growth rate not of money that cost us anything. It's money, it's credit that we get to spend, and we don't even get to pay it back. We don't even have to pay it back. We don't get to pay it back, and we don't have to. Either way you want to phrase it. And so it sounds ridiculous, but this is the first episode of this series. Maybe later on I'll think of a better way to explain it. But so far, this is the best I can do. This is my first draft, my first attempt at explaining this. So when the wave gets split, that's effectively what happens in the monetary analog of the real world. What would be happening if we did this in terms of orchestrating it somehow in some sort of cryptocurrency exchange system or network? That's what it would amount to. Credit we don't have to. So credit we don't have to pay back, but we can't spend it on anything useful. You know. It's kind of like, in the old days, they had banks had their own currency they exchanged with each other, and you and I, 100 years ago, would never see that currency. It was a special printed currency. Um, I forget what it was called. They might have been banknotes. Yeah, they might have been called banknotes. And they were huge denominations, and they had to do with the assets of the bank, you know, to balance them out between each other because they did transactions with each other. I don't know, and that's the way they did it. And so they had huge denominations, and we're talking like huge. And these were paper specie, they were something you could put in your hand, but the public never got to see them. And you can go online and look it up. It's a very fascinating subject. So that's what's going on. It's like an in-house trading, so to speak, in huge amounts, and it keeps growing, and you don't have to pay it back. And it's a credit line. And you keep getting it because it's reversed itself. So splitting the wave, even though we can't spend it yet, is entirely important because we get to build it up at an exponential rate. And can you imagine having a credit line that does something like that? It's amazing. And that's all because of the complex of factors going on here. The transfer coil, the diodes, this capacitor over here, which may seem like it's on the other side of this transformer, but it's still on this side because it's strictly a voltage component. And so for all intents and purposes, its positioning over here may seem arbitrary, and it might be arbitrary. Maybe I could have put it over here just as readily. I don't know. I didn't even try that. But out of habit and prior experience, I always put my capacitor to the other side of the inductor to what is feeding it. It always works out better that way. And I think I did try it, and it didn't work. So I had to do it this way. I tried both ways. Yeah, but in past experience, I've always done it this way. For some reason, the current has to pass across the inductor to get to the target, the capacitor on the other side, for it to work. It's as if this is a magnet for voltage. It just wants to draw it here. In any case, so all these things help to split the wave. And then, of course, the spark gap, I believe what happens is it may not be dissipating a whole lot of energy, quite frankly, when it fires, when it arcs. But I think when it arcs, it realigns the voltage and the current waves back together again just for a split moment, which is enough to collapse the surge. Believe me, it doesn't take much. If we didn't have these buffers over here, the load would do the same thing. It would collapse the surge because it realigns it. It realigns the voltage with the amperage. So that's what the spark gap does, but it only does it for a fraction, teeny-weeny fraction of a second, and only once in a while to make sure this thing doesn't escalate and cook itself to the point of explosiveness and destroy itself with hyperinflation. So I've regulated it, but not by taxing. See, we get rid of the IRS. There's no taxes involved here. We simply stop the manufacturing process by bringing the two components of an AC wave back together again, the amperage and the voltage. I like to say amperage, I'm sorry. That's just the way I am. Because that's what I measure, so why should I call it current? I can't measure current with units of current, so why call it current? I might as well call it by its units. I'm trying to keep things simple for my simpleton brain. So that's all the spark gap does. It realigns the two wave components to stop the surge. It creates an instability, and that's why Tesla called it, or his patent attorneys, whoever was the cause of the phrase disruptive discharge, because it does discharge a little microwave radiation, or electromagnetic radiation in the microwave band, maybe, or probably the radio band too, tons of that. Maybe a little in the audio band, Oh yeah, of course, a little in the audio band. All kinds of bands. It's creating all kinds of waves. Sonic waves and electromagnetic waves, electrostatic waves, all kinds of waves, X-rays, maybe a few longitudinal waves. But that's not its function in the circuit. Its function is to disrupt the escalation of a surge by emitting a discharge. So if we call it for short a disruptive discharge, what we've done is we've left out some important words. And that's why we misinterpret what a disruptive discharge is supposed to do for us. And then bandy it around the play game of telephone. And then we're all ignorantly misinformed and disinformed and disenfranchised and confused and running around, not with our heads cut off, but turned around. And they keep turning. They don't. They keep rotating, like Linda Blair in The Exorcist. It just keeps turning and turning. Woo! Oh, that movie is a riot. That it could scare anybody is beyond me. Watching it now, it's like, gee, that looks dumb. But, you know, this is in hindsight 40 years later watching little outtakes, you know, on YouTube. It's like, whoa, that is bizarre. How would I don't want to say any further. Oh, anyway. So I think I've explained this left side of the circuit as best I can. Now, what happens here is that we realign the two components, and it's going to cost the circuit at a certain rate, the left-hand side. But again, we try not to put too much of a load here on the right side that would cost us too much on the left, unless we make readjustments here. You can make minor readjustments as you know, dynamically, but outside that window, you would have to just rebuild this, either larger or smaller, particularly these VC coils, to accommodate a change of what you're doing over here. But also, if you want to reduce this down to a kitchen appliance, you'd have to reduce the voltage input. You can't give it 3 volts, and that's where logic gets turned. Conventional logic gets turned on its head. You'd have to give it 3 microvolts. You'd have to throw away most of the voltage so as not to squash, because giving an appliance size unit of this schematic, it'd be like stepping on an ant, you know. You don't want to do that. So but if you're straddling a little pony, you know, well, okay, a pony can handle you, or a horse. But a little ant, I don't think so. So you have to rate everything comparable. Everything has to be comparable, sized comparably, or else you squash it with too much input. So it's really different the way this thing functions. And I guess I've covered everything I needed to cover, because I just wanted to get the ball rolling and get it started, get my subconscious working on this, because it's an important theme. You know, what would this mean in terms of money, in terms of cryptocurrency in particular, which makes it easier to envision what would be happening. I'm sure somebody could figure it out better than I, but I'm pretty definitely sure there's a one-to-one correlation. Whether or not we'd be allowed to do it legally is another matter, but thank God, if you build one of these units, hopefully, and if you don't go tell anybody that you've built one, hopefully nobody will come and confiscate it from you, provided the FCC never finds out, because you will be giving yourself away. So you've got to take measures and precautions so that you don't broadcast electrostatic and electromagnetic interference in your local radio wave neighborhood, so that the FCC does not find out. But other than that, who should know, you know? You got your own little free energy circuit in the basement of your home, and so when the power goes out, your power is on, and hopefully the neighbors don't get mad and raid your place and destroy everything. So you share a little with them, with your neighbors, and make sure they're happy so that they don't go crazy and attack you. Hey, it's sharing, right? It's nothing wrong with that. But you don't have to save the world. You don't have to share it with the world, just with yourself and a few of your neighbors, and leave it at that. But how would that work in terms of money, in terms of cryptocurrency? I don't know, but I think this is at least a first good step to try to figure that out. I haven't covered everything, obviously. I haven't covered, well, what's the transformer, you know? But I'm going to leave it at this, because that's as far as my mind can tolerate, or my body at this point. And I think it's a novel question to ask. You know, how would you convert this circuit of mine into a a cryptocurrency analogy that might even work. Who knows? Maybe somebody will figure that one out.